So I've had mental health issues since childhood, and I'm also a researcher, so obviously understand the importance of research, especially when you're involving parents and young people. But as a parent, essentially, of a child with autism, I suppose that's kind of my key role here today, to try and help prevent my children developing mental health issues. From a grassroots level, I'm going to call you Ms. Elliott, because also I'm not even going to try to attempt to pronounce your first name. Sorry about that, I'm a chicken. What can I do locally in my community, sort of kind of grassroots, to help improve, not just my own children, perhaps the children of my community that have autism and ASD? Obviously, there's lots of forums and things like that, but is there anything that you think is really key and valuable for those that feel capable of doing so, to do something in their community? What would that be?
I think the most important thing, firstly, is raising awareness amongst anyone, if they have autism or not, raising awareness of both autism and neurodevelopmental problems and mental illness, mental health problems. Secondly, the main thing for people with autism, ADHD, whatever it is, if you're trying to prevent mental health problems, you need to kind of educate them on kind of resilience and emotional intelligence. So helping them to understand what emotions are, and saying, well, when you feel like this, that's fine. When you feel like this, then you should talk to someone. Helping them simply to understand, well, this is happy. This is what happy feels like. That's what happy looks like in other people. That's what sad is. Simple things like that. It's literally having that conversation can make the world of difference. I never, when I was growing up, because I never spoke out about how I was feeling, I never understood what happy or sad was. I never had the ability to tell the difference between different emotions. I just knew I felt good or I felt bad. And actually that's not a very good way of functioning. So it's having that conversation with young people or slightly older people even about their emotions.
Can I just add, I think I'm aware that there are a lot of parents here today, and I'm aware that some of you have had some not brilliant experiences, both with mental health services and with schools. And I think I would encourage you not to get ground down. I think one of the problems with child mental health services is we are a Cinderella service of a Cinderella service, but it's partly because it's that the young people can't advocate for themselves, and those of you who are parents with complex needs are dealing with multiple appointments for your children, just trying to keep the show on the road. Don't be shy of complaining. Don't be shy of going to Health Watch and saying, the CAM service is saying that they can't do this, or the waiting list is 18 months. I don't think that's acceptable. To raise awareness of service provision, and also encourage those working with your children to educate themselves. So there is free education on mental health available by a program called Minded. So if you just Google it, it's Minded, all one word, but the E is a capital, and there is information there aimed primarily at teachers, but for any practitioners who are working with children who aren't mental health specialists. There are more advanced modules for people coming new in working in CAMS, and there are also stuff available for parents to just, if you're worried about something, go on the websites and be advocates. I wish you didn't need to be, but actually you do.
Hi, I've got a question for Maya. Have I pronounced it correctly, Maya? I'm interested in your experience of DBT. I'm a clinical psychologist for CAMS in Lincolnshire, and I've put together a DBT skills programme that we've been rolling out for the last 18 months. But I'm always open to adapting it and improving it. And I'm really interested to hear what aspects of DBT were most helpful for you. But also, how can I make our group more accessible to young people with autism? How can I improve it so it's more inclusive?
I think when you're talking about psychological therapies like DBT or CBT or anything like that, I think it's always important to say that some things work for some people and other things won't work for other people. But with DBT, the thing that I found most useful was that it was the skills. Because in CBT, I never got an adapted version of CBT, so I had the bog standard, what are you thinking? And I'd be sat there going, I have no idea. That's not what I'm good at. Hence the autism diagnosis. Yeah. With DBT, someone sat down with me and said, okay, so if you're feeling this, what are some of the kind of things that you could be thinking? and that helped me to kind of think about things in a different way. DBT also taught the skills, things like emotional regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and those are things that everyone knows who's interested in autism are not things that people with autism are naturally good at.
Okay.
So just having, even if you don't have the full DBT course, just simply having the skills available for people with autism was really good for me. I think with DBT there's also the aspect of the individual element of DBT. I had a practitioner who had an interest in autism, so she knew what language to use. I've met a lot of practitioners who use they use language that doesn't make sense to me, so they use a lot of idioms and sayings, and I'm sat there going, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's just, a lot of it is language, and bringing yourself down to that level of being able to understand that some things are simply not going to work, like using idioms and sayings and things like that.
Great.
I can't think of anything else to say.
That's really helpful. Thanks very much. Can I ask one more question of Astrid?
Okay.
Just a question for Astrid. I noticed on the mapping study that the whole of the East Coast side didn't have any red dots. Is there a particular reason for that?
It's not a picture. I just took it from the internet.
Oh, that's fine. I just wondered whether Lincolnshire and kind of that East Coast weren't involved in your study in any way. Okay.
No, we're still running it, so we don't have any idea yet what is coming in. But if you do provide something, please go to our website, complete the form and submit it. Thank you.
Just to say, we've got a pile of postcards here that I'll leave on the stage. Please do come and help yourselves.
So, lady there.
I'm really not sure who to address this question to, but I'm just wondering whether anybody's doing any work in psychosexual development, particularly for young people and young adults on the autistic spectrum.
Perhaps, James, you might be the person to start with.
I'm not actively aware of any research. It doesn't mean that there's not anything going on. There are so much research papers which are churned out every day. Even for me, my job, it's very, very hard to keep track. I think that there's an article in Spectrum which is out, which has done a little bit of looking into that. So if you look on the Spectrum website, they've got some really nice articles about recent research developments, but it's not something which we are currently focusing on, if I'm honest.
I'm not aware of any either, but it's a very, very important area.
Sorry,
As a parent, I'm aware it's a very important area.
Please answer then.
There is a research project going on through Bangor University which is about sexuality and autism. It might not be exactly what you kind of want, but it's actually we've got some flyers somewhere. I'm looking for any of my colleagues who are not here.
There's somebody waving.
So we've got
Pink
some
jumper.
so we've got some flyers which we can give out to you, and it's a research project for young people at the moment, and we're sort of talking to them about sort of sexuality and you know what's happening there and things like that. So it's yes, because there isn't very much research, but it's really hard to recruit. So if anyone will be interested in passing that on to anyone, that would be really helpful.
Thank you, because one gets told random things by people who may or may not know what they're talking about, such as that twice as many people on the autism spectrum are gay as are gay in the general population, or that paedophilia is more prevalent in the autistic population, and you think, well, is this true? Is there any research backing this up?
I can tell you that this study will not answer any of those questions.
Oh dear.
It's not a prevalent study. It's really to just start exploring kind of the idea of sexuality and understanding, and also get sexual education. That idea that it's needed, and it doesn't happen so much because a lot of people don't know how to communicate it over. So that's more that.
So there's a lady down here. It's two down.
Do you know if any of the mental health studies are looking at the correlation with autism's my field, so between autism and the different environmental factors, such as different types of education or employment?
So one of the PhDs which we're funding is looking at specifically that. So we have got one PhD which is looking at the environmental factors which lead to mental health problems. And I think there's one other piece of research from an existing database. I think there's some emerging findings which showing that employment is linked to quality of life. So people with autism who are in employment have a higher quality of life than people who are not, which doesn't mean that employment. There could be other causal factors, but it's suggestive that that's an outcome which people with autism are actively seeking.
So the other piece of research that's currently happening, is that looking at different types of education, or is that looking at employment also?
Sorry?
The first study you mentioned.
Yeah, that's looking at environmental factors which affect mental health and autism. Okay. And the second piece of research which I mentioned there is an analysis of our cohort database.
Okay.
Which is
what age groups are you looking at?
In our cohort database, so that's looking at adults.
Okay.
So that's all adults with autism.
And the environmental one?
I think that's looking at children.
Okay. Do you know when the research will be out?
I guess that's a function of when the PhD produces them. So
4 years is the answer. 4 years.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Am I missing anybody who's waving their hands? It's quite tricky in the lights.
Stuart?
Sorry. Oh, yeah. See, I was told you I couldn't see in front of the nose.
Thank you. I'll try and make this question broad for all, so anyone can hopefully try and answer it. But I've been looking into the area within the correlation of or the relationship between autism and mental health within the past year, and using some of the research documents that are available, as little as they may be, that have specifics in the direct links with autism and other issues that can develop later on throughout childhood and later life. I was just wondering, because it's quite an issue for some people, in spotting the difference between mental health conditions and what might be classed as autistic behaviour, like having a meltdown, for example, although that's not exclusive to autism, but those conditions which shows challenge in behaviour and attitudes at home, which can be hard to distinguish when your child might be actually acting out because of environmental factors or factors that might be playing in school or work if they've been bullied or harassed. Have you identified anything, or if from personal experience, for someone with autism to identify, how to distinguish between the two differences? Because I suspect they are very different, but when you have a condition like autism, they probably tend to mesh for a lot of people.
I think it's not just for people with autism, if people don't mind if I take that. I think the simple answer about how you distinguish is careful assessment. And I think it harks back to Professor Hastings' talk earlier when he talked about diagnostic overshadowing. And I think so it's also clinicians and teachers who kind of explain everything away as well. This young person has autism. So, of course, they're like that. But if you actually sit down and talk to the young person, talk to their parents, talk to their teachers about how they are day to day, day after day, I think it's usually about the level of the severity of the problem. It's about how long it's lasted for. So how intense is it when it happens? How often does it happen? And how long does it last for? And is it getting in the way of everyday life? Because as Professor Simonoff said, what distinguishes everyday worry, and our speaker earlier about anxiety, what distinguishes everyday sadness or everyday response to stress or everyday anxiety from something that becomes a mental health condition is that it gets in the way. It's distressing and it gets in the way of what you want to do to function. So it's careful assessment, and if you don't think you're getting that careful assessment, keep banging on about asking for it. Don't be shy.
I think it's a really good question as well, because I think that it's also possible that depression is under-recognised in autism as well. So the piece of research from Sarah Cassidy showed that 2/3 of people with autism and no intellectual disability reported having suicidal thoughts, but only 1/3 reported having depression or depressive thoughts, which is kind of counterintuitive, and it sort of potentially indicates that how people with autism think about mood and that interaction with suicide is very different from the general population, if you like. So it sort of suggests you need very specific mechanisms of assessing mental health problems in autism.
I think from a personal level, someone who has had autism and for some complex mental health problems, they do overlap a lot. And I spent years untangling the things which I knew were the autism and the things that I thought were mental health problems. And that was one of the most important parts of my recovery, was that learning what is autism, so what do I have to accept that I will live with, and what can I improve on. That took me a long time.
Hello. My son has ADHD, and he's done really well. But the question is sort of how to help, in that when you're talking about anxiety, I can see that a lot of the time when he gets asked something that puts him under pressure, he becomes anxious, and when he becomes anxious, he gets aggressive, and he's learnt to walk away. The trouble is that means you never quite get to discuss some of the things that you feel might help him. You describe beautifully your epiphany, and it almost sounds as if you got low and you said, right, I'm going to turn around and go back. I don't even know whether he needs this anymore, whether he's 25 now, so I just wonder how, with the anxiety, when it turns to become anxious, you feel under pressure, you react aggressively and walk away, any advice to help him come back to face to deal with whatever it was that was making him anxious? Sorry, it's a bit of a convoluted question.
I think it's really difficult, I think, for family members sometimes when they're in that situation to know the best thing to do, because you want to sort of persuade or reassure or to sort of bring somebody back to opening up and talking about those issues. And that can be very, very tricky for that person who may find, and I don't know whether, it depends on the individual, but may find having those conversations with a family member really quite difficult and quite tricky. Have you had any external support at all through, or is it just that your son, he wouldn't accept any support with those things?
No. I was interested about the study on ADHD and transition, because we got to 16, 18 and left the CAMS service, and that was it. I mean, he still gets his Concerta regularly and he uses it, and I'd say he's doing very well. It just suddenly struck me that that when he gets anxious, he walks away. I thought there was a point at which I thought every child walked out of school regularly, and they found out and told you, and you went and got him and put him back. So he's learnt that, and it's great. But now I see perhaps it's stopping him moving to the next, dealing with these things a bit more, and maybe also, we need to think about the anxiety underneath.
Quick point. It may be, personally, I'm very bad at verbalising how I feel, and it took a long time for me to realise that if I wrote down how I was feeling, it didn't affect me so much, and that I found it a lot easier to communicate that through writing. And it may be about finding other ways in which he can express himself. Instead of coming back and going, we need to talk about this, go, okay, well, write down what you think happened or how you were feeling, or draw how you were feeling. I don't know if that would help, but maybe just thinking of other ways of going about having that conversation.
Yes, and also probably as well selecting, because at times when people are very anxious, it's very difficult then to connect with what they're feeling at that point. So kind of picking the time as well to have those conversations and make sure that they're well timed when the person is relaxed as they can be, so that it's easier to sort of address those things.
Tried that after he's had too many beers, he doesn't
I've only recently heard the phrase, and I haven't read more widely about what she actually said, but I think it was Temple Grandin that talked about the loving push. And I think this is the overlap for clinicians and parents, the trickiest area, when you kind of, encourage the going to the next stage, facing up to things and not being avoidant, and when you kind of give them space. And that's a useful overlap, I think, for parents and clinicians. But that's something I'm going to investigate further. And I think it was Temple Grandin's phrase, if anyone knows.
Thank you. Right, it's not the lady in the middle there. How are we going to get the mic back to you? Straight up the middle.
Hi, sorry to throw something completely different into the mix, but I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts on the whole PDA conversation, because we have a child with millions of diagnoses and struggle with the fact that every different professional keeps telling us different things and different strategies, and you have to find your way through this maze. So we have sort of paediatricians saying you need to deal with it as PDA, you need to reduce demands, and then we have the psychiatrist saying you need to face up to the OCD and you have to face, deal with it and not run away from it, and we're struggling through this wave, and everybody's basically come to the conclusion he's just very anxious about everything, and let's just keep him as calm as possible. But I just wondered if you had any thoughts on PDA or how that fit into the whole mix, or whether that was something that was completely separate from
I think I'm going to ask Tamsin to talk to that one, I think.
Okay. It's a slightly tricky area because it's not a terribly old concept. It's not yet in any of the official diagnostic classifications. Now, none of these things are kind of carved in stone anywhere. There isn't an X-ray or a blood test that you can do to demonstrate it. If it is a useful way of thinking that explains your child's behaviour, fair enough. But it sounds to me like what would be the most helpful thing is to get the team of people working with your child round a table, so that actually there is a shared.
It obviously works because we use the strategies. We brought everything down to rock bottom, and then we've done exactly what. Sorry, I don't know your name. The psychologist said about the little steps, and we felt like we'd gone back to him being 5, but actually little steps, and we're getting back to him being independent and doing things for himself, and it has worked wonders. It's life changing, but it's just everybody keeps throwing around names and ideas and concepts, and it's all very confusing. But it's just about basically keeping the anxiety down so that they can deal with as much as possible, and I presume breaking the demands so that they're manageable without letting him run away from it, I suppose. Is that?
I always think it's the tricky balance between encouraging the exposure and reducing the avoidance, but not causing a meltdown.
Yes.
And yes, it is confusing, but don't forget that you also are the expert in your child.
Yeah.
So yes, it may be confusing, and I guess it's important to make sure that you have the time and space to think about how does this make sense with what I know about my child and what has worked before, and getting the professionals as far as possible to work together, because if they're all pulling in different directions, that's not helping you.
Okay, thank you very much.